Good morning, everyone. It seems like the attendance has been slowly trickling in. So we'll go ahead and get started. We are so excited for you all to join us today for our very first ever virtual workshop. Super exciting. And this is also the first workshop that we are offering for 2026. My name is Jessica Bryzik, and I am the new Save Our Stream Coordinator with the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection's Watershed Improvement Branch. If you have been involved with the Vernal Pool Program the past few years, Callie Cronin-Sams previously was in this coordinator role, but she has moved into a different role with the DEP, but luckily she's still around, so she hasn't gone too far. But I am the new Save Our Streams coordinator and super excited to be here with you all today. Today we're here to provide you all with information on vernal pools and also the wildlife that rely on these habitats. And we're here to share a way for you to get involved to help us raise awareness of these important ecosystems, and also a way for you to help us build our understanding of vernal pools in West Virginia. You may be wondering, what is a vernal pool? Is it a pond? Or maybe you have a lot of knowledge on wetlands and you could be presenting here today at our workshop. Either way, this training is a perfect opportunity to dive into the wonderful world of vernal pools. To help us have a smooth meeting today, we've got a lot of people on the call. Please keep your microphone muted at all times. Even if you're in a quiet environment, sometimes your microphone can have feedback from the meeting. So please just keep that muted. If you have any questions during our presentation today, please drop those in the chat. Our Eastern Basin Coordinator with the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection, Mary DeWeese, will be helping us organize and also relay those questions to our presenters. So feel free to just drop them in the chat. And then after each one of our presentations today, we'll set aside time to address those questions. We will be recording most of the workshop today, and I'll be sure to share the recording and also some follow-up resources after our workshop ends, probably in a few days. Don't expect it the minute we click off this meeting, please. In the chat, I have also pinned a couple of different resources for you to review. Most importantly, please make sure that you check out the Vernal Pool webpage. I'm going to switch my screen over to our Vernal Pool homepage. This website has all you need about to participate in our monitoring program. We have a short introduction as to what is this monitoring program. You also have my email address over on the right-hand side. So if you ever have any questions, you can feel free to send an email to saveourstreams@westvirginia.gov. And scrolling down on the homepage, we have information on our training workshops. As I mentioned, our virtual workshop today is the first of 4 workshops that we are hosting for 2026. Our other 3 workshops will be in person at West Liberty University on February 28th, Rolling Ridge Conservancy in Jefferson County on March 14th, and the New River Gorge National Park on March 21st. We still have spaces available in those workshops if you would like to attend or if you'd like to share those workshops with a friend. We also have our QR code on the right-hand side and a link in orange to our new Survey 123 form, which if you are sharing your data or your observations for vernal pools, we will be asking you to submit your data using that Survey 123 form. And we'll be going over that process later on in the webinar. Scrolling down on our homepage here, we have a bunch of different resources for you. The left column is information specific to West Virginia's protocol. We have a link to our instruction manual for monitoring, links to data sheets that you can print out. We also have a guidance document for how to use Survey 123 and access our form, and some other amphibian resources as well to help you identify egg masses that you might find in your vernal pools. On the right column, the first 4 videos, our vernal pool team has put together training videos to help showcase and just preview the monitoring protocol and Survey 123. So we really encourage you to check out those videos to help refresh your knowledge each year or at any time throughout the season if you have questions. And then we also have some other really cool videos linked that you can check out at your own time. All right, so you may be wondering, what is the Vernal Pool Monitoring Program? And this program is actually relatively new. It started in 2021 with the goal of raising awareness of wetlands and more specifically vernal pools. The program has morphed into a collaborative partnership that brings together different state and federal agencies, and it also relies on citizen scientists like yourself to help us build our understanding of vernal pools. You're probably going to hear this a lot today, but vernal pools are ephemeral and elusive habitats, and there's no singular database that is available that describes the location and condition of vernal pools in West Virginia. And that is exactly what we are hoping to do with this program. As we learn more about where vernal pools are located and the populations they support, we can better protect them. Our monitoring protocol uses visual assessments to collect information on the location and conditions of vernal pools. And this visual assessment protocol just means that all observations are collected from the edge of the pool. So you don't have to worry about bringing your waders and jumping right into the water, because we never want to enter the water of the pool to help limit the spread of emerging diseases, which can negatively impact our amphibian friends that call the vernal pool home. Since 2021, we have hosted 10 different workshops, trained over 200 volunteers, and documented over 100 different vernal pools. That's really incredible work. And now we are so excited to have you join our team. At the end of this workshop, you are considered fully trained, and you're encouraged to get out into the field and find a local vernal pool near you that you can visit each year and submit your observations to our monitoring program. Our agenda for our workshop today, the first 2 hours or so of the workshop, we will be having presentations from our partners. We will have Sarah Miller and Kylie Joins from the Department of Environmental Protection presenting on wetlands and vernal pools. Then we will be handing it off to Kevin Oxenrider with the Division of Natural Resources to share a little bit about vernal pools and amphibians. We will be taking a 5 to 10 minute break depending on our time. And during that break, we'll encourage you to complete a knowledge check survey. This is just a short Google form that you can use to see how well you listened to the presentations today. And after we come back from our break, we will be reviewing the answers to our knowledge check survey. And then we will be diving into the West Virginia monitoring protocol and conducting a virtual field visit to a vernal pool in Fairmont and actually be completing the data sheet. So that way you have all the skills and the knowledge you need to get out into the field to monitor a vernal pool near you. I also wanted to mention that each one of our presenters we have this morning played a very large and pivotal role in developing this West Virginia monitoring program. So thank you to all of our presenters today, and we're super excited for you all to meet our West Virginia vernal pool team. I'll go ahead and hand it over to our first presenters, Sarah Miller and Kylie Joins.
Good morning. My name's Sarah Miller, and I am going to work on sharing my screen. All right. So again, I'm Sarah Miller, and I am here with Kylie Joins.
Hello.
And we're going to talk a little bit about the wetlands program at DEP and how it is associated with the vernal pool program. And also would like to shout out for those of you who know Elizabeth Beyer. She's our predecessor, and she was instrumental in helping get the vernal pool program started. So just a little bit of background. At the DEP, we are kind of the sister branch to the Watershed and Improvement branch that Jessica is a part of. We are the water quality standards and assessment section, and so the wetlands program is under that. Our program has three major components. Mostly what we do is monitoring for wetland condition. We also provide regulatory support and outreach assistance like we are doing today. Our monitoring is statewide. We're located in Charleston, and we cover the entire state. So we do statewide condition monitoring at randomly selected locations each year, totaling about 45 to 46 locations. And every 5 years, we do national surveys at 10 locations. We also study restoration sites to help improve our knowledge of restoration treatments that are working the best and the assessment method scores that can be achieved through those restoration treatments. And we also study reference sites, which are wetlands throughout the state that are not impacted, not disturbed, and are kind of the crown jewels, what a wetland can be, what we can compare our restorations against. So for our regulatory support, we provide training to regulators in our wetland rapid assessment method that we use for monitoring, because this method is also used in mitigation and restoration monitoring, which became a requirement as of April 2025. And in outreach assistance, we will assist WIB with teacher workshops where there are wetland features, water festivals, and now with vernal pools. And you can see there on the screen on the right-hand side, that's Garrett from our stream section helping at a Huntington Water Festival. And some other services that we provide, we also gather data about rare plant and community species from the wetlands that we survey. Also, if we happen upon rare birds and mammals, we'll submit all of that data to the DNR. And we also will provide location data on vernal pools as we happen upon them during our monitoring process. And now I'm going to hand it over to Kylie, who's going to discuss more about the wetlands throughout the state.
Hi there. My name's Kylie. I work with Sarah on wetlands. So I'm going to try to do a who, what, when, where, why sort of wetlands. People who don't have a lot of exposure to wetlands tend to think of wetlands as like ponds with cattails in them or something huge and dramatic like the Everglades. But wetlands can be anything from a pond with no vegetation to a meadow with goldenrods in it, or a shrubby swamp, or big forested swamps like the Meadow River. And so that means because of all the different sorts there are, it can be anywhere across the state in the right area. So we've got this map here shows the little light green areas throughout the state are areas where wetlands are mapped. And you can see little constellations of brighter areas, and that is the Canaan Valley and also the Meadow River. And because those are large, mostly intact complexes that hold a lot of acreage. And you can see we've got the acres mapped. It's about 120,000, and we estimate historically there are about 500,000 acres. So development throughout the state has greatly reduced the amount of wetland acres there are, because in West Virginia there's a lot of mountains that aren't so easy to settle, but there's a decent amount of flat land as well in floodplains and whatnot. And then that is what was easily developed, but that also involved filling wetlands. So we've lost a good amount of wetlands to development, to the point that wetlands make up less than 1% of the area of the state. But as you can tell from these little pie charts, wetlands account for 23% of the biodiversity in the state, like the entire amount of biodiversity, and 44% of the rare species that occur in the state. So they're a tiny little postage stamp of area, but they hold a whole lot of important stuff. And so here's a little highlight of some of the rarer and more high quality wetlands across the state. So you get the high Allegheny wetlands that include our highest elevation wetlands like Cranberry Glades and Canaan Valley. And those wetlands have a slightly different character than the rest of the state because of the high elevation, they can support vegetation from the Pleistocene, the post-glacial ice age era. So we get a bunch of plants up in those wetlands that look more like something you'd find in Canada, just because of the high elevation. So those are special places to visit. The Meadow River wetlands are a large floodplain forest. Ohio River has some floodplain forests along it as well. And then in the eastern panhandle, you can see we've got the special types of summit sinkholes, which are dependent on karst geology, which is limestone that erodes and creates sinkholes, as well as marl marshes, which have a lot of alkaline soils, meaning they support different types of plants that are very rare throughout the state because they only occur in these alkaline marshes. So, and here's a little map highlighting where our exemplary wetlands are. As you can see, lots of it overlaps with the areas that the national forests and national rivers are, meaning they're already protected for the most part. And these wetlands usually score higher because they are home to a lot more rare species and rare habitats, including this cottongrass fen that is over in probably in Canaan Valley. So it's a particular collection of plants that grow together in particular places, making it rare in the state and around the world. And so what grows there together are things like beak sedge and cottongrass and cranberries and peat, and all of that together makes cottongrass fen. Okay, so we've talked about the where, let's talk about the what a little bit. So what is a wetland exactly? So depending on the organization that is making the definition, there's several different ways that you can word the definition of a wetland, but it all comes down to, in the end, the assemblage of plants that are there, how much water stays on the landscape and when, and the way that the soils look because of that water that's on the landscape. So hydrology for wetlands can vary a lot. On the drier end, the wetlands usually are flooded for a few weeks out of the year during the growing season, which is when the plants are coming up. And wetlands can be anywhere from that to saturated soil from groundwater for part of the year, like spring, or all year. And some of them can remain ponded all year. And that water on the landscape means that the plants that live there have to be specialists. So, if you overwater your house plants, usually it will kill them. But wetland plants have special adaptations like ways of absorbing oxygen different ways than just through their waterlogged roots, and just different structural elements that allow them to thrive in water. So those plants are called hydrophytic, which means water loving. And for the most part, when you have a wetland, you'll have a lot of the plants that occur there have these special adaptations. And that's one of the ways you could just tell at a glance. Like this picture here on the left, we've got a plant called woolgrass, which is a bulrush, and it is specially adapted to live in wetlands. And you can see the trees that are there are willows, which are also water loving. So they all have adaptations that let them live there. And hydric soils, that just means soils that are more likely to hold on to water in these wetland areas. So being saturated for a good amount of the year or flooded has a different effect on soils. It tends to leach the iron out of the soil, leaving the soil behind gray. And then that means that whenever the soils are exposed back to air again, they'll get these orange patches where the air exposure allows the soil to basically rust. So you can see in this picture up on the right, there's a place where a root grew down in the soil and exposed the soil to oxygen, and the root channel rusted. So yeah, wetland soils are usually grayer than upland soils and tend to have these orange patches that make them really distinctive. And wetlands do a whole lot of important functions in the landscape. I'll talk about a few of them here and then go into a little more detail. So one great thing that wetlands do is help mitigate floodwater a good amount. So usually it's a large area with a good amount of vegetation. And so that allows water that enters them through floods to just slow down and spread out, as well as be physically slowed down by all the plants and shrubs that might be there. So that not only allows the water to become less destructive from all the velocity, as it also lets the sediment and mud fall out of suspension. And so usually a wetland's water will be clearer and cleaner when it comes out the other side. This also is something that happens with pollutants as well, through these physical properties, as well as some chemical reactions, which I'll talk about in a second. This one shows a pond, but there's also different sorts of habitat features that Sarah will talk about later, that make wetlands able to be home to a lot of creatures and plants. So not just ducks and wading birds, but a bunch of other special plants. So one of the sort of nicknames we have for wetlands is the kidneys of the landscape, because not only do they function to let pollutants fall out and accumulate in the wetland and then not wash downstream, they also have chemical processes that happen thanks to the anoxic environment in the soil being saturated. So that lets things like nitrates from agricultural runoff be turned into nitrogen gas by denitrifying bacteria in the soil. So it does a lot of various processes that allow chemical pollutants to be defanged as it would be. So they help mitigate pollution in the landscape a good amount. And also they stabilize water supplies. So I said earlier they help slow down floods, but another thing with wetland soil is that it can generally hold on to a good amount of water itself. So it will help slow down and absorb the groundwater, but it can also, especially in headwater wetlands in special protected places like Otter Creek here in this picture, and the soil can be made of a lot of organic material like peat moss, and that functions just like a sponge. The wetland, in fact, when it rains, will swell as the peat moss absorbs water, and so it acts like a sponge. And so on the other end of flooding, in drier weather, the wetlands can slowly let water back out to keep the water supply a little more stable. So they help on both ends. And also wetlands can help shorelines and banks be protected from erosion. So this plant here on the left is a big meadow of this plant called water willow. It blooms with a really pretty purple flower you don't get to see too often. So, but they grow alongside big rivers like the Greenbrier, which is what's in this picture. And so those plants can go in and hold between the cobble and sediment and hold it all together physically. It can help provide resistance for floodwater flow to slow it all down too. And the net effect of that is that the water doesn't have as much energy to just claw away at the banks and cause erosion. That can cause a lot of structural issues and sedimentation downstream. So a lot of benefits. And here in West Virginia, we have some cultural uses for wetlands just in the fact of recreation. So through the Mon National Forest and Canaan Valley National Wildlife Refuge, as well as some state parks and forests, there are places you can go visit wetlands with boardwalks or nice paths. So the Watershed Improvement Branch a couple years ago on one of our wetland grants used that to go out and make some virtual visits to about 12 wetlands throughout the state, scattered pretty evenly. So depending on where you live, you should be able to find one nearby-ish. So we've got these nice video visits, talking to some experts from the area. There are fact sheets. There are signs at the wetlands themselves if you visit. So yeah, you can go out and learn from some interpretive signs and just absorb the absolute beauty that is a wetland. They're just special, unique places where you can find distinct birds and wildlife, and it's just great to be out among nature and being a part of the landscape. And we also have some educational opportunities from the Watershed Improvement Branch. So they hold workshops and water festivals, but also we have a sort of self-guided wetlands class you can do through the STEAM booklet. It's made for grade levels K through 12, so anyone can enjoy it, basically. So it's got some scientific activities like soil observations and amphibian observations and some discussion of the plants and those hydrophytic plant adaptations, all kinds of good information in there. It's available online at the Wetland Resources webpage, which I'm sure is linked in here somewhere. But yeah, that's a great resource to check out, especially if you're going to go visit a wetland. So you can sort of have a little self-guided workshop with yourself. Wetlands are great ambassadors for nature.
And I'm going to jump back in here and talk a little bit about wetland conservation and then segue back into vernal pools. So wetland conservation about a century ago started out with a focus on waterfowl, where duck hunters were a major stakeholder in wetland protection, especially these open water habitats where waterfowl breed and overwinter. And now we include all fish and wildlife and the different wetland habitats that can be found apart from the open water habitats. In the picture here, you can see a forested wetland with skunk cabbage in the understory, which is a great spring food source for black bears. And also you can see the little masked bird in the bottom right of the screen, and that is a common yellowthroat warbler, one of the migratory bird species that come to the state to breed, and they use the kind of edge and early successional wetland and riparian zone habitats. And so in our wetlands monitoring program, we take a holistic approach in our rapid assessment method and look at the wetland from all angles. Vegetation plays a major role in our method, as well as soils and hydrology, as these were discussed by Kylie in the wetlands definition. And our wetlands monitoring method gives several final scores, but two to focus on are the condition score. You can see on the top right photo, the condition score of this wetland in Cranberry Glades is 124, and the habitat score or H function score is 100. This makes this wetland an exemplary wetland, where at minimum the condition score would need to be just over 76, and the habitat score would have to be just over 50 to be exemplary. So this is one of our reference level wetlands in the state due to its protection and its limits in stressors in and around the wetland. So apart from stressors and problems in the buffers, We also look at the topography and structure of the wetland. Topography, like macrotopography, microtopographic complexity, made up of plant hummocks and tussocks, can provide different levels of habitat for plant species, such as atop the hummocks where it's a little drier or in between. And this sort of topography can also contribute to slowing and retaining water. Also within that structure we look at structural patches. And so in the pictures across the bottom, you can see some examples of these, such as coarse woody debris and snags in the far right photo. Also animal mounds and burrows, like the crayfish burrow sort of in the center there, and tip-up mounds on the right side. All of these provide different types of habitat for different species of animals and plants. And you'll also notice in the area in front of that tip-up mound where the tree has fallen over and you see the exposed roots underneath, the mud flat in front of that tip-up mound is actually a dry vernal pool. And in our assessment method, we would call this a pool inaccessible to fish. But there are some obstacles in finding vernal pools. And one of those is that they can be small, like they can be less than 1/10 of an acre. And our threshold for mapping our wetlands tends to be right at 1/10 of an acre, sometimes smaller. We also use aerial imagery and soils layers, topography layers, these sorts of things to identify wetlands while still in the office. But this is especially difficult with vernal pools because they're often under canopy cover and tend to be or can be on the smaller side. And so you can see an example of some of the wetlands that are mapped on the WVDEP GIS viewer. Again, this is Cranberry Glades. And I don't know if you can see the acreages or not, but they run from 233 acres to down to 14 acres in this particular selection. So a lot of the wetlands that we're picking out through this method, desktop method, tend to be a bit larger. And so to find vernal pools, we can contribute by going out and finding these locations during our usual assessments. So we also have folks in the water quality standards and assessment section who study streams, lakes, and fish. And so during the course of their usual survey work, they can also submit vernal pool locations. However, we're only so many people. We do cover the whole state, but it really takes a lot of boots on the ground to collect this wealth of data that Jessica mentioned we're already really starting to build. And currently the DNR and Fish and Wildlife carry out vernal pool monitoring with coordination with us here at DEP. But a citizen science contribution really makes a big difference. And you can see here I have an example with the second printing of the breeding bird atlas in West Virginia that utilized the efforts of around 200 volunteers and state employees. And this is a tome. It's a textbook sized book with a wealth of information. And so your work is very, very important. And so I will, with that, hand it back over, and Kevin will be up next. And Jessica, I don't know how you want to handle questions or if you just want to.
It seems like we have a few minutes, so we could go ahead and take some questions right now if there are any in the chat. Any questions for Sarah and Kylie about wetlands or vernal pools?
As of right now, it doesn't look like we have any active questions in the chat. David asked if Stoffers Marsh was included in the wetland list, and Kylie answered that it is, and she included a link. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat.
We will also be sure to share out all the resources that we've linked in the chat in our follow-up email after the workshop concludes.
We did have one come in from Emma. She asked, do you collect data on vernal pools created by off-road vehicle tracks?
Very good question, Emma. Yes. So our vernal pool monitoring protocol can be completed in natural wetlands and also vernal pools that are created by vehicle tracks. So I've learned through this vernal pool work that these creatures will almost utilize any habitat that they are able. And sometimes those tire ruts do collect water. And we actually have some pictures later on in a presentation that show some amphibian egg masses and tadpole development in tire ruts. So yes, we are looking for data in natural vernal pools and also those vernal pools that maybe are not naturally occurring, but are finding those shallow depressions from off-road vehicle tracks.
Thanks, Jessica. Another question's come in. Steve has asked, is there a list of vernal pools in West Virginia that needs monitoring?
Good question, Steve. The answer is sort of, and also not really. So through this monitoring program, there are different levels of monitoring that we are asking volunteers to complete. And one of those levels is just recording like the location only of where you think a potential vernal pool is. And then subsequent levels of our monitoring protocol dive deeper into actually documenting the conditions of vernal pools. So we don't currently have a big long list of vernal pools and where they are, but if you are looking to for help to find a vernal pool, you can definitely reach out to us and we can help match you with a vernal pool if we know a vernal pool offhand that's located near you. And we also do recommend you check out your local parks, state parks, county parks, city parks, and any public lands. They often have some sort of land manager that you might be able to call or email and ask if they have a vernal pool on their property. And that you might be able to find a vernal pool that way. But our big goal of our monitoring program is to build that big list of where vernal pools are. So we are slowly working towards that.
Great. Another great question in the chat. Andrea said, to go off trail in the Canaan Valley National Wildlife Refuge, a special use permit is required. Is permission needed on other lands, other public lands in West Virginia?
So we would recommend you look online for the specific land that you are looking to access. So you can visit like the state park website or the Forest Service website. And I know for both state parks, state forest, and public lands, there are different use requirements and permits. And so those vary greatly by the specific land and site you are visiting. So definitely check out the websites beforehand to see if those are required. All right, thank you all for the wonderful questions. And thank you so much, Sarah and Kylie, for sharing your joy of wetlands. It was a great presentation to learn about how these wetlands are such powerhouses. And we'll go ahead and hand it over to Kevin.
Good morning, everybody. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right, can you see that? Cool. All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Kevin Oxenrider. I am the Amphibian and Reptile Program Leader with the West Virginia Division of Natural Resources. And today we're going to go over West Virginia's vernal pool amphibians. And I will say this isn't going to be a complete overview of every single species that frequents vernal pools, but it will be the main species that you will encounter during your time doing these surveys and doing this monitoring. And let's see. Okay, make sure it's all working. So the objectives are going to be, what are vernal pools? So we'll talk a little bit about vernal pools and what they are. We're going to go through vernal pool amphibian life history, talk about the identification of some common vernal pool amphibians, and then talk about disease risk at vernal pools, something really important and something that we want everybody who's participating in the monitoring program to be mindful of when they're out there doing their surveys. So a vernal pool is typically is a shallow depression that usually contains water for only part of the year. And this usually is typically from late winter to early summer. So right now is about the time when we start to see vernal pools filling up from snowmelt and also early season rains. And then typically those should be able to hold water through the spring and into early summer before they start to dry out. They're often associated with forested areas and forested wetlands. And the pools can range in size from something as small as we were just discussing before, like tire ruts or anything like that, to larger, more complex systems throughout wooded areas. But one of the main things that are important when we talk about vernal pools, and especially for this monitoring program, a lot of what when we're saying vernal pools, what we're talking about are amphibian breeding sites too, but they lack fish. They don't have fish in them, which are major predators of amphibian larvae, but also eggs, which causes them to not be able to be successful in those systems. So for amphibian ecology, vernal pools are critical components for some species of amphibians in their life cycles. They serve as breeding sites for things such as the wood frog that you see here. They also serve as areas to rear tadpoles and larvae. But adults typically are dispersing away from those vernal pools, but they typically don't go too far if they're using vernal pools for breeding. Metamorphosis takes place in these settings, and that's where you have an adult, which I don't know if you can see yep, it looks like you can see my cursor. You have an adult like this adult wood frog right here. Amplexus takes place. That's part of the breeding process. That is when a male mounts a female, and the female does egg mass laying, which you see right here is an egg mass. These then hatch into tadpoles and larvae, which you see here, which then become metamorphs and froglets, which you see here, and then eventually become adult frogs again. And so this whole process takes place at vernal pools for many of our amphibian species here in the state of West Virginia. And the timing of breeding migrations varies by species. So when I say migrations, typically our vernal pool species are going through migration patterns. And so they'll have large movements of animals heading to the vernal pools to use those vernal pools for breeding. But when those animals are moving is going to vary throughout the year. They're not all using them at the exact same time to breed. But for example, our earliest breeding amphibian in the state of West Virginia is the Jefferson salamander, which with all of these rains that we've been having recently and the rains that are supposed to be coming this weekend, I would not be shocked at all if Jefferson salamanders are already at vernal pools starting to breed. Wood frogs then end up being our next more early breeding amphibians, followed by spotted salamanders, American toads, gray tree frogs, and then lastly marbled salamanders, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But they definitely kind of move in waves. We typically do have like wood frogs, spotted salamanders, and American toads all kind of breeding at the same time in those areas, although they're a little bit staggered. But in general, just wanting to make sure that folks are aware that there is a staggering of breeding activity that takes place at vernal pools. So we're going to get into now talking about identification of vernal pool breeding amphibians in West Virginia. And we're going to start off with the poster child of vernal pools, which is the wood frog, or Lithobates sylvaticus. The adult has a white upper lip, which you can see here. This is a photo of an adult wood frog right here. You can see that white upper lip that we have. That's very obvious, contrast with the gray body that you see overall. They also look like, I like to call them the little bandits of the amphibian world, because they have these black kind of bandit or Zorro masks, for those of you that are familiar with Zorro. But they basically have these black triangles that form right behind the eyes. And one of the other things that is distinct about wood frogs is they have what's known as a dorsolateral ridge, which is this ridged area, this portion of the body that's elevated off of the rest of it on the back. Their egg masses, which you can see right here, and one that's in the water down here, are gelatinous, and they look like grapes kind of floating on the top of the water. And they typically are attaching these to sticks and vegetation in the water, but their egg masses are typically floating closer to the surface of the water, which is a little bit different than some of our other amphibians. But as you can see, they kind of look like a clustering of grapes. Here, right, is a perfect one where it's a nice circular kind of spherical egg within the mass itself. And their call, which we'll listen to in just a second, they kind of sound, in my mind, sound like squeaky shoes, although a lot of folks talk about them sounding like wonky ducks. I say wonky because a lot of people will say at night that they hear what sounds like a bunch of ducks quacking, but they don't quite sound right. And these are typically wood frogs that are breeding. You'll see hundreds of these guys showing up at vernal pools, and they make a lot of noise when they are calling and trying to attract females. And wood frogs are distributed across the entire state of West Virginia. Although we have some areas here that you see that we don't have county records for just yet, these are older maps, so that could possibly be incorrect. Haven't been searched for there yet, but typically we consider wood frogs to be statewide. And so I want to let you guys take a listen to the call of a wood frog. So here you go.
Wood frog, Lithobates sylvaticus, formerly Rana sylvatica.
So I'm sure many of you have heard that before. If you've been out and about in the spring, they can get quite loud, and you can kind of hear exactly why they sound, people say that they sound like ducks, especially when they're having a full chorus like that. They definitely have a bit of a duck-esque sound to them, a quack-esque sound to them, should I say. So that's the wood frog.
Wood frog.
Oh, trying to get past that again. We don't have to listen to it again. Our next one that we're going to talk about is another poster child for vernal pools, which is the spotted salamander, or Ambystoma maculatum. These guys are large salamanders. The adult, which you can see up here in the top picture, are large. As I said, large. They're very thick salamanders. People say that they kind of look like a cigar in that how thick they are. They're black overall or gray with yellow spots, which is why they're known as spotted salamanders. And they have a pale gray on their belly that doesn't have any spots. So it's completely plain on the belly. Their egg masses, which you see here, are globular. So if you remember with the wood frogs, where they had very obvious spheres within the egg mass, we don't see that so much with spotted salamanders. You might see within the globular shape that like you see in this photo down here, that there may be some smaller eggs inside of there, but they're not as distinct as you see in something like a wood frog. Typically, they're going to be clear or they're white and milky looking on the bottom, but they are attached to submerged sticks and vegetation on the bottom of pools. So unlike wood frogs that have their egg masses floating on the top, or at least attached to vegetation high up close to the water surface, the spotted salamander is going to have their egg masses attached to vegetation that's on the floor of the vernal pool. And so they're going to be having much more lower in the vernal pool water column. And these guys are also statewide, although we do not have records up in the Northern Panhandle for some reason. We still think that they're up there, but they're just not as common up in the Northern Panhandle of West Virginia. And they do not make breeding calls like we do with our frogs. So I don't have a sound for you all to listen to. If we were to listen to the sound of a spotted salamander, it would probably just not really sound like anything, more just like a clicking if when it's trying to eat or something. But anyway, we don't have a call for them because they're not calling like we see with our frogs and toads. All right, so now that we've talked about our two poster childs for vernal pools, we'll start talking about some other species that occur in vernal pools here in West Virginia, starting with the Jefferson salamander, which I talked about before. This is our earliest breeding salamander in West Virginia. As I said, I would not be shocked if these guys are already at the vernal pools breeding. The adult is a large salamander, so think the size of a spotted salamander, although they're a little bit more slender than we see in spotted salamanders. They are black to gray overall, but they have pale blue flecks along the sides of them, which you can kind of see here in this adult animal. And the thing I love most about Jefferson salamander, this is my favorite of the vernal pool amphibians, and it's because of these toes. They have these extra long toes that are very obvious when you see them in person. And you can kind of see it right here, how long this toe is. And you don't see that in spotted salamanders. They don't have as long of toes. Their egg masses are also globular, just like the spotted salamander. So think about that same kind of concept when you're thinking about an egg mass for them. Although they're typically clear, although you see here there's algae on this one that's forming, but they typically are clear in color. But their masses are typically attached to submerged sticks and twigs, and they kind of follow the stick or a twig. And so they're not sitting directly on the bottom, kind of like we see in spotted salamanders. And Jefferson salamanders, we're learning more and more about these guys, but they're certainly not as common as like spotted salamanders are in the state. And most of our records occur along the eastern portion of the state. We do have them in some other areas, and they likely are statewide as well, with the exception of the Northern Panhandle. But we just haven't been able to find them as much. They are a little bit more cryptic, especially because they breed earlier in the season and kind of hightail it out of there before we have major breeding activity taking place with like wood frogs and things like that. All right, our next salamander is the marbled salamander, or Ambystoma opacum. These guys, again, larger salamander, thick-bodied, and here's an adult up here on the top. They're black with white netting crossbands on the back, like you see here in this picture, and they have a black or pale belly underneath, so they don't have any speckling or anything like that. What's really cool about these guys is that rather than laying eggs in the spring, like we see with all of our other vernal pool species, they actually use the vernal pools in the fall when there is no water. So females will actually migrate to the vernal pool in the fall. They'll find some bit of like down log or something like that to get under, and they'll lay their eggs, as you can see here, underneath that area, and they'll actually guard those eggs until the pool fills up with water, and then they'll migrate back to their underground area in the terrestrial habitat. So the eggs are not actually contained in a globular mass like you see in the other Ambystoma species. So pretty cool life history for these guys, a little bit different than what we're used to seeing in other Ambystomids, in that, you know, as we said with the spotted salamander and the Jefferson salamander, they're actually moving to the pools in the spring, right around now, to go and breed. Whereas for marbled salamanders, they're moving to the pools in the fall when there's no water in the vernal pool. And again, these guys, we don't have as much information on, but likely statewide. So you can kind of see their distribution there. All right, the next one is the eastern newt, or Notophthalmus viridescens. These guys are interesting in that they have a pretty unique life cycle, where they have an adult phase that you see here, which is aquatic. And that's a medium-sized salamander, so smaller than what we were just talking about with our Ambystomids, so smaller than Jefferson's spotted and marbled salamanders. They're like an olive brown to dark green color, with red spots that you can see here that are circled in black. And their belly is yellow with black spots on it that you can see here. After this adult aquatic phase, they have their eggs are laid in the water, and they have an aquatic larval phase as well. But they do have this juvenile stage, or the red F stage, that is completely terrestrial. And the red F is orange to red in color, with red spots that you see here. So the same red spots that we see in the adults also are appearing on our red Fs, and they are encircled in black. As I said, they are terrestrial in their habits. The eggs are single jelly-covered eggs attached to submerged vegetation. So you don't typically see newt eggs very easily, but they do, as I said, single jelly-covered eggs in submerged vegetation, and they are aquatic. And red-spotted newts are known to be statewide here in West Virginia. And I'm going to also give a shameless plug really quick for an ongoing project with the eastern newt here in West Virginia. The WVDNR is currently also doing a citizen science project where we are collecting observations of eastern newts. So when you guys are out there doing your vernal pool monitoring, if you do come across an eastern newt, we would love to be able to get that observation from you. And you can actually fill out a Survey 123 application as well, field form, to submit that observation. So just a shameless plug there. All right, our next one is the American toad, or Anaxarus americanus. So now we'll get back into actually getting to hear calls again. The adult is typically brown or gray in coloration, but they actually can vary in color. I've seen them, like you can see in this one, where they're a little bit more red looking. They definitely can vary in colors. They have dark patches on the back that contain bumps. So you can see here these dark patches that have warts in them. And they have these enlarged parotoid glands that are located right behind the eyes on either side. And these actually release toxins when touched. So if you do touch a toad, you should probably wash your hands. And by probably, I mean you should wash your hands. And I would suggest not touching them, just leave them alone. Just like you should leave everything alone, just look with your eyes. But egg masses, they're laid in long, thin, often coiled masses that you can see here. They almost look like a bunch of pasta that are being laid. And their call is like a long trill, like a kind of call. And you'll hear that in a second. They are statewide. And here's the call of an American toad.
American toad, Anaxarus americanus, formerly Bufo americanus.
As I said before, just a trill, like a kind of call. And so, yeah, feel free to take a listen to that on through YouTube or anything like that.
American.
Sorry, we'll keep going. All right, so the gray tree frog or Cope's gray tree frog, Hyloversicolor and Chrysocelis, you can't tell the difference between these two just from looking at them. It's really through between the calls. You can see an adult individual up there in the upper picture. They vary in color from mottled gray to green. They have really large toe pads. So they're a typical tree frog that has these large toe pads that help them kind of stick to surfaces so that they can climb and be in trees or on the side of your house or anything like that. And they have these yellow inner thighs, which you can kind of see right here. There's yellow right here on the inner thigh of that individual. Their egg masses are laid in a thin film-like mass on the water surface. And these guys are ones that folks typically hear in the middle of the day in the summer. You can hear them at night too, but they're the ones that you definitely hear during the middle of the day in the summer. They have a call that's kind of bird-like and short. It's a kind of a bird-like trill. It's kind of like the toad that has that long trill that we typically hear. I almost said that you guys got to hear, but unfortunately you didn't get to hear. But that's the gray tree frog. And as I said, their egg masses are laid in a thin film across the water's surface, as you can see here in these photos. And they are distributed statewide as well. And I will say the thing about gray tree frogs is not only will they lay eggs in vernal pools and areas like that, but these guys are also notorious for laying eggs in like swimming pools, bird baths, places like that as well. Almost every year I get phone calls about individuals saying that they have tadpoles in their bird bath or in their like kiddie pool. And I can almost assure you that it is a gray tree frog that has done it. So something to look out for as well.
Great.
All right, so our next one, and I think potentially our last one, is the spring peeper or Pseudacris crucifer. Lots of folks hear this. This guy is kind of what heralds the arrival of spring, I feel like, for most people. The adult is very small, as you can see. Well, you can't really tell that it's small here, but it is a very small frog. This is an adult individual here. They're light brown to pale olive color with a dark brown X that you see on the back of the animal. Sometimes that X isn't always connected to make a perfect X like you see in this animal particularly, but they do typically have these kind of swoops that they have at the upper and lower portion of their back. Their egg masses are deposited singly or in small clumps on submerged vegetation like you see here. So kind of similar to what we saw with the eastern newt, that they are putting them singly on vegetation and things underneath the water. And their call is a bird-like peep. It's like a beep, 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 beep. And when they get very cold or angry, they kind of do like a trill, which I wish I could let you guys hear that because it's kind of funny to listen to. But unfortunately, yeah, as I said, again, it's not working for some reason. So anyway, they are also statewide. They'll also use vernal pool and wetlands to breed.
Spring.
Okay, so now that we are done with identification, we're going to jump into talking about amphibian declines and disease in particular. And so amphibians, the leading cause of amphibian declines is habitat destruction and emerging diseases. And specifically, an emerging disease is a disease that has increased recently or could increase in the future. So when we use that word emerging in that context, just make sure you're aware that it's something that is either starting to become pretty prevalent in populations, or there is a risk of it becoming prevalent in populations. And the major emerging diseases that impact amphibians and reptiles here in West Virginia, or at least in the United States, are ranavirus and chytrid fungus, which I put BD and B-Sal in here, and I'll talk about both of them here momentarily. But B-Sal has not actually been identified yet in the United States, but BD definitely has, and it does occur here in West Virginia. And vernal pools present an elevated risk for disease because animals are concentrated in those vernal pools and they can't leave. So usually because vernal pools are small and you have large numbers of animals in one area, it's kind of like when we had, COVID take place and so having to do social distancing. Well, it's difficult to socially distance if there's not a lot of space for you to be able to distance yourself from somebody else. So that's why vernal pools can kind of present an elevated risk for disease. And I apologize, I should give a trigger warning for folks that there will be some photos of dead and dying amphibians here as we talk about disease, because it's a very unfortunate side effect of disease. But we're going to first start talking about ranaviruses. And so ranavirus is a viral disease that impacts amphibians, reptiles, and fish. And mass mortality events have occurred in over 20 US states so far for ranavirus. And it's probably closer to almost every state with the exception of maybe Alaska. But I'm not exactly sure if it has happened there or not, but it definitely has occurred in many states across the US. And these events can impact local populations, but we're still not exactly sure what it's doing range-wide as of right now. The routes of transmission are through indirect contact. So when animals come into contact with through water or sediment, hitting their cells on their skin or their gills or their intestines, so that when they're just ingesting it in water and stuff like that, they can come into contact with the viral disease, or through direct contact during breeding activities or other social interactions, or when they are ingesting it. So if they're depredating a dead animal or an animal that has ranavirus, they can also pick up the disease. And ranavirus is pretty detrimental. When it does occur, it can cause 50 to 100, almost 100% mortality in larval amphibians. And wood frogs appear to be the most susceptible to this disease. And this is one that has been detected, or I should say both of these diseases that we're talking about with BD and also ranavirus, both have been detected here in the state of West Virginia. And clinical signs of ranavirus, we start to see swelling in the legs and body. You have internal hemorrhaging that's taking place, which causes redness in the vent area and in the legs, like you see in these photos. And in reptiles, you'll actually see white plaques starting to form in the mouth, swollen eyes, and wheezing take place. They look like they have a stuffy nose. And that's typically for turtles. The chytrid fungus, this is a fungal disease that's only known to impact amphibians. It is not like ranavirus that impacts reptiles and fishes as well. It only impacts amphibians, and it has caused large-scale population declines. And in fact, BD has led to the extirpation of amphibian populations globally. So certainly something that can be very detrimental. There are two species of chytrid fungus, as I said before. There's BD and B. Sow, and we will talk about those here in just a second. So BD, or Batrachochytrium detrovitidis, is why we just say BD instead of trying to use that mouthful every time, but is the leading cause of amphibian decline worldwide. The thing about this is it's a fungal disease. So when we say chytrid fungus, they're a fungal disease, and they have aquatic zoosporic fungi. So they actually have the ability, they have a flagellum on the back of their spores. So they actually can swim essentially through the water column. It infects the skin and causes skin lesions and anorexia and death in animals. So basically what ends up happening is you start to see lesions forming, you start to see skin build up to try and fight those lesions, and there's a lot of sloughing of the skin, which we'll talk about in a minute. And the routes of transmission for BD are typically through direct means, either through social interactions or the zoospore kind of swimming around with their flagellum to be able to come into contact. And as I said, this has been detected in West Virginia. As I said, with the clinical signs, excessive shedding of the skin or sloughing of the skin, because you're starting to have a lot of skin trying to be replaced, which causes the animal eventually to suffocate in the when that's taking place. There's a lot of reddening of the skin, and then unusual posturing like you see here in these animals. How are we doing on time? We're doing all right. All right. And then B. sow, as I said, it was has not been detected in North America yet. It also has an aquatic also an aquatic zoosporic fungi. It was first described in 2013 after there was a mass mortality event of these fire salamanders over in Europe. And at this point, B. sow is only really known in Europe and Asia. But we are fearful that it will eventually get over here to the United States. And so it's something we're certainly being very mindful of and taking precautions to try and alleviate it from getting here. The routes of transmission are the same as BD, so direct contact through either social interactions or through the fungi, the zoospore actually swimming with its flagellum. And there have been susceptibility trials that have been conducted on North American salamander species to see how they would fare if B. sow were to become prevalent here in the United States. And we found that the eastern newt is highly, highly susceptible based on those lab trials. And so in order to be able to protect our amphibians and reptiles, you know, we ask that when people are visiting water bodies, whether it be wetlands, vernal pools, lakes, rivers, streams, ponds, whatever, we ask that they do their part to try and decontaminate their equipment so they're not inadvertently spreading disease. This is a video that I want to show, and hopefully the volume will come through. So you'll have to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, but I'm hoping the volume will come through. But a video that showcases how you go about decontaminating your field gear. This was created by the Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation, which is a group of partners across the US that focus on doing conservation and management for amphibians and reptiles. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. And Jessica, if for whatever reason you guys aren't hearing it, just let me know.
It is just very quiet.
Okay. Is it possible for folks to turn up their volumes? Let me see if I can maybe do something about that. Let's try. Is that better?
No, I have my volume all the way up.
Who forgets their first encounter
Okay.
Wait,
Well,
I think we could hear it there.
with a frog, salamander,
Yep, we got it.
or the sound of a frog chorus heralding the first days of spring? These events mark places and seasons in our minds, connecting us
I don't know what just
to
happened.
nature and revealing how we fit into the larger world. They can be life-changing. Sadly, many of these animals are disappearing, and a major threat to their survival is infectious diseases. Ranavirus is one of the leading causes of amphibian population declines around the world. Turtles, snakes, and fish are also susceptible to ranavirus. Once infected, animals can experience severe internal bleeding and rapid death. In fact, scientific evidence shows that populations of species sensitive to these viral infections could go extinct within just a few years. How does ranavirus spread to amphibians and reptiles? People can unknowingly carry the virus, which can attach to skin, boots, clothes, equipment, vehicles, and recreational gear, from a wetland with the disease to another without it. Once introduced, the virus can spread quickly. Frogs, toads, and salamanders with ranavirus can develop skin lesions, blood spots, and swollen abdomen. Infected turtles will often have a runny nose, swollen neck, and white plaques inside the mouth. Diseased animals may act lethargic, move erratically, or fail to react when threatened. However, not all animals carrying rhinovirus will display symptoms.
Using these simple steps before and after you enter a wetland, you can help stop the spread of rhinovirus and other pathogens like the chytrid fungus BD. To begin, set up your cleaning station at least 150 feet away from any wetland or other body of water to avoid contaminating them with bleach. Then, remove all mud and dirt from boots and gear and rinse them with clean water. Soak or spray them in a solution of 3% bleach, or a half a cup of household bleach in 1 gallon of cold water. Leave this on for 5 minutes. Finish by rinsing everything well with clean water. Another species of chytrid fungus, B-sal, has decimated salamander populations in Europe. B-sal has not yet been detected in the Americas, but its disinfection requires a stronger bleach solution that is needed for rhinovirus and BD. If B-sal exposure is a concern, disinfect your equipment with 20% bleach solution or 4 cups of household bleach mixed into 1 gallon of cold water. Please remember, bleach solutions lose their potency over time, so dispose of any bleach solution more than 5 days old.
At a minimum, for larger equipment and gear, pressure wash and allow to air dry. Remember, brush, rinse, bleach, and rinse. By doing these simple measures, you will do your part to protect our amazing wildlife.
To learn about alternative disinfectants to bleach, mixing appropriate volumes of disinfectant, or more on amphibian disease, please go to our website.
All right. And hopefully you guys were able to hear that for the most part. But that's just the step-by-step way to go about decontaminating your gear. And as Jessica had brought up before, we really, as part of this monitoring program, you shouldn't be going into the wetland at all, but still good to try and decontaminate your stuff, even if you're just walking on the banks, just as a precaution to try and reduce the potential spread of disease from one place to another. And one thing that I just want to put in a plug for really quick here at the end is that if you do witness a die-off event taking place at any of your vernal pools when you're doing monitoring, we definitely want you to report those outbreaks. And so you can report those either by contacting myself at the West Virginia DNR or any of your DNR regional offices, or you can contact the natural resource police officers to let them know as well. You can also report through this herpetofaunal disease alert system at herpdiseasealert@parkplace.org. This will get them in contact with me so that we can do any investigations we need to do in those locations where a mass die-off has happened. And then obviously, if there are land managers that you are working with to do this vernal pool monitoring, you should let them know as well. And just is something important to make sure to collect if you do see a die-off event. Make sure that you give your name and the contact information for follow-up questions, the date that you saw the die-off event, what you saw, where it was, the types of animals that you saw in the life stages, and is it something that animals are still dying out on that location if you have it? And then photographs are very important to help us in being able to manage that die-off event taking place. And with that, I don't know if I have time for questions, but if I do, I will take them. And if not, then I will try to do follow-up later. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin. We'll spend just a minute or so on questions here. If Mary, we've got any questions in the chat?
We do have a few. Adrian's been answering a couple, so I will skip over that. But I did want to mention that she posted a really nice resource link from USGS, the frog quiz for comparing the different frog calls. Emma asked, I think this was in relation to the DNR study, can we email a list of new coordinates as well?
You can email them if that is easier. We certainly would love for you to use the app, but if it's easier for you to email them, feel free to email them straight to me.
Wonderful. Andrea had asked, can you see the zoo spores swimming in the water?
You cannot. They are microscopic. Good question.
She also asked, do we have fairy shrimp?
We do have fairy shrimp. Yes, there are fairy shrimp in West Virginia. There's actually several species of fairy shrimp in West Virginia, which is pretty cool.
Very cool. Let's see. Another question from Emma. What is a safe way to decontaminate electronics like GPS devices, water quality monitoring probes, and cameras that will not damage glass parts, metal, or waterproof rubber seals?
Yeah, so for some of those, the best way to do it is either to, you can use other types of disinfectant, which if you go to the park website, you can find all that information. There's things like Virkon you can use, which are a lot less harsh on your equipment than things like bleach. Also Clorox and Clorox wipes and things like that can have the potency to be able to disinfect as well. So certainly something to take a look at. But one of the best ways to be able to disinfect is just to let things dry out for a period of 48 hours completely. And so that's another way of doing it that is not as harsh on your equipment. So.
Awesome. Another question. Can we bag boots and equipment and decontaminate after?
Yes, you can do that if you'd like. Just make sure that you do actually disinfect them and don't forget them in your car like I would.
Me too. Awesome. A few more. Does Rana and Chytrid come and go, or once the pool has the disease, will it always have it?
Good question. It comes and goes. So it's something that on some years we'll end up having a die-off event and you'll have it there. And some years the viral load just doesn't get to the point where it causes die-off events or anything like that. So, but very good question. Yes, it can live in the soil, especially if that soil stays wet for long periods of time. So.
Great. And then I believe this is the last one. Adriana asked, beyond being preventable through cleaning equipment and stopping spread, are the ranavirus / chytrid fungus treatable?
Treatable, I guess it kind of could be treatable if the animal is able to make it long enough for their bodies to fight it off. But we don't really have anything to help them with that. It's not like we have a rehab program or anything like that for amphibians. So we don't have any kind of treatment that we can do in the wild. It's not like we can go and like inject some kind of chemical or medicine into like a vernal pool or anything like that.
Yeah, I wish. A few more have come in since Emma had a second part to her question. Is 70% ethanol or isopropyl alcohol and drying sufficient for disinfection?
Yeah, I would have to go back and look specifically at the the park website for that to know if that specific one is one that works, but I do believe it is. But drying definitely is one. Just allowing it to be dried out and dried out for at least 48 hours. More is better. But drying completely can kill zoospores and also kill the rhinovirus. So.
Awesome. And then this should be the last one. Steve had asked, should we disinfect boots worn to a vernal pool since we do not enter the water?
I would suggest yes, just to be safe. That's just me. Especially because vernal pools, like Kylie was talking about, how they swell and things like that, like the wetlands will swell. So you actually could be standing in an area that you don't think is wet right then, but had been wet at one time, or so could be squishy or whatever, and still have viral load in those areas that are close to the pool. So I would, just to be safe, go ahead and disinfect.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Kevin. I think that was all we had in the chat.
We do have a knowledge check survey that I am sharing in the chat. If you have a few spare minutes of your break, you can complete that survey to just kind of test your knowledge. It's not a quiz and we won't hold any wrong answers against you. Don't worry. And then we will go through the correct answers when we return from our break. And also when we return from our break, we will be walking through the West Virginia monitoring protocol. So be sure to have your data sheet handy. If you are able to print, please do print out a copy. But at the very least, please have digital access. So that way, as we're walking through the protocol, you can fill out the data sheet yourself, which is a very useful way to learn how to collect good sound data. So thank you to all of our presenters, and we will return back here at 11:55. All right, welcome back from your break. I hope you're able to get up and stretch your legs or take a body break and do whatever else you need to do so we can continue on with our training. I'm gonna swap over my screens and we will review the answers to our knowledge check survey. Just a reminder to please keep your microphone muted at all times during our training today. We've got a big group. And a reminder that we are recording this workshop, and we will send the recording after the workshop ends, and also any resources that we share in the chat as well, in case you missed something. All right, so popping over to our knowledge check survey, the first question is, what is the West Virginia Monitoring Program? And you can check multiple answers for this one. So the first option is correct. The monitoring program is a visual assessment protocol to document the location and conditions of vernal pools. The second option is also correct. So our monitoring program is a collaborative partnership of agencies, organizations, and citizen scientists that are working to raise awareness of vernal pools and their importance. The third option is not correct. So the statement was that the monitoring protocol is a rigorous scientific collection protocol that requires extensive multi-day training to record observations. And the reason why this statement isn't correct is because it doesn't require extensive multi-day trainings. After completing our workshop here in just about a 3-hour period, you are considered fully trained and you're able to go out into the field and collect observations and submit data to our program. The next option is also false. So the statement was that our monitoring program documents only naturally occurring vernal pools. And we are interested in both naturally occurring vernal pools and constructed vernal pools, or vernal pools that you might find in weird habitats like tire ruts or any place else that these vernal pools may be forming. So we really are interested in a wide array of the different types of vernal pools that are out there. The last statement is that this monitoring program is an opportunity to build our understanding of West Virginia's vernal pools and allow us to track changes over time within West Virginia, as well as contribute to regional knowledge. And this is most certainly correct. By participating in this program, you are contributing data that will be used to fuel a large database that will help us monitor these vernal pools over time. The next question was true or false. Vernal pools are generally larger than 1 acre and are deep enough to swim in. And this is actually false. So there's no size or depth requirement for vernal pools. And more often than not, these vernal pools tend to be very shallow and often small, although they can be large, but they're not required to be large. It's also important to note that the size and depth of these vernal pools will vary dramatically throughout the year as they cycle through their wet-dry periods. The next question is true or false. Vernal pools dry annually or every few years and therefore do not support permanent fish populations, which creates a safe refuge for amphibian breeding and development. This is true because vernal pools do dry out annually or at least every few years. Fish can't live there, and this creates a safer habitat for our amphibians and also our macroinvertebrates like fairy shrimp. But with that being said, the amphibians and macroinvertebrates are well aware that they must complete their life cycle, their aquatic life cycles, before the pool dries out as well, because they don't want to get stuck stranded in a dry pool. Our next statement is true or false. Vernal pools are isolated ecosystems, and the integrity of the forest buffer that surrounds the pool has no impact on the pool itself. And we got 100% correct on this. This statement is most definitely false. So the riparian buffer is every bit as important as the pool itself. The adult amphibians that we learned about today will live in the surrounding upland habitat, and they'll return to the pool each year for breeding. The riparian buffer also provides leaf litter that will fuel the invertebrate life of the pool. The trees in the riparian buffer also help filter runoff and pollution, and the trees provide shade, which can help regulate the temperature and keep the pool nice and cool. Our next question is, unfortunately, amphibian populations are declining. Check all possible threats that are attributed to population decline, and unfortunately, they all are true. Our amphibians are the unfortunate truth that many things are contributing to our amphibian population decline. Our next question is, how can you limit the spread of emerging diseases that threaten amphibian populations? And everybody got correct on this. We want to always decontaminate our gear, our footwear, and any equipment with a bleach solution and clean water rinse before and after each site visit to the pool. We most definitely do not want to dip our gear into the vernal pool water, and you probably don't want to be visiting a vernal pool if you have the flu just because you won't feel well. All right, our last question here is to identify which vernal pool species laid the egg mass. Here is a photo of the egg mass. And the correct answer is wood frog. So if you can see in the picture that this egg frog wood mass is floating near the surface, which is an indicator of wood frog eggs. You can see that they have black embryos in the center of a grape-like cluster, and that there's no outer layer around the egg mass, and it has a clear outer matrix. So those are just some of the features that can help you identify if it's a wood frog or another species. And on the West Virginia Vernal Pool website, we also have an egg mass identification guide that you can take out into the field with you to help you identify those egg masses. All right, do we have any questions before we move on? I'm seeing a question from Paige asking for the egg masses lying at the bottom. Do those special sunglasses help to see them? Yes. So we do recommend having polarized sunglasses with you to take out to your vernal pool visits, and they will help reduce the glare of the water, especially in sunny conditions. So it is recommended that you have a pair of polarized sunglasses. All right, we're going to continue on to learn about the West Virginia Monitoring Protocol for Vernal Pools. And if you have your data sheet handy, that is a good thing. And if not, please have digital access to it, or if you are able to print your data sheet, that would be incredible as well. So I want to start off by emphasizing that this monitoring protocol that we are asking volunteers to submit data to is used for vernal pools. And we are defining vernal pools as isolated wetlands that have no permanent inlet or outlet, and they lack a surface connection to other bodies of water. These vernal pools we are looking for are utilized by indicator species such as the wood frog, the spotted salamander, and the fairy shrimp. We're also looking for vernal pools that have a wet-dry cycle that preclude permanent fish populations. So we're really looking for pools that are drying out every year. And if they're not drying out every year, perhaps they're drying out every few years. As we've mentioned, again, we want to emphasize that our protocol is using visual observations only. So that means you can complete the entire assessment from the edge of the pool, and there is no reason to ever enter into the water. We also recommend never to touch the egg masses or any salamanders or frogs or wildlife that you might see around the pool. These are such sensitive habitats, and we are just visitors to them when we are out collecting data. So we want to be very respectful of the creatures that live here. We also want to limit our general impacts by decontaminating our gear before and after every site visit. It's also a really good practice to watch where you step and make sure that you're walking carefully and mindfully so you don't crush any little salamander friends. It's also another good practice to follow leave no trace. So making sure that you don't leave any trash or gear behind in the vernal pool that you're visiting. Just a quick recap of our decontamination process. I know we have talked about it a lot, but it is just so important. We want to be brushing off all of the soil, seeds, and vegetative matter of our boots, and especially in the treads and any other gear we're taking with us. We want to rinse with clean water. We want to spray the equipment with a 10% bleach solution and allow that to soak for at least 5 minutes. That time period is very important so the bleach can do its thing and disinfect. And then the last step of our decontamination process is to rinse with clean water and making sure that we are doing this entire process away from the wetlands edge. So our monitoring protocol is meant to be accessible, and it's meant to be completed with relatively few pieces of equipment. And most of the equipment that you'll need to complete this process are resources and reference material. So first you will need your data sheet, and you can have a paper copy, or we will be demonstrating our new Survey 123 form later on in the workshop. And you can also collect your data directly into the Survey 123 form. It's really based upon your own personal preference, whether you would like to use a data sheet or the Survey 123. You'll also want to have a copy of the instruction manual because it will walk you through how to complete the protocol and have some tips and tricks in there. It's also a good idea to have your egg mass ID guide available to help you identify those egg masses. And all three of those resources, the data sheet, the instruction manual, and the egg mass ID guide, can be found on the West Virginia Vernal Pool website under the training resources. Some other materials that you'll want to have with you is your mobile device, and you can use your mobile device to collect the GPS coordinates of the location of the vernal pool, and also you'll need to be collecting pictures of the vernal pool and egg masses. So your phone is really good at doing a bunch of different things, so we recommend carrying that with you, and it's also a good safety practice to have your mobile device with you. We have mentioned that polarized glasses are a really good piece of equipment to carry with you. That way they can help limit the glare on the water so you can see the water and egg masses more clearly. You'll also want to have your decontamination kit, so your stiff brush, your clean water, and your bleach solution. If you are using your Survey 123 app in the field, make sure you have that downloaded onto your device before you go out. And some other optional items that you might want to have is a digital camera, if you prefer taking pictures using a camera. You could also have a GPS unit to collect those GPS coordinates. And you could also have a tape reel with you. And both the GPS unit and the tape reel could be used to collect the size of the pool. But again, those last three items are optional and not required. So moving on, our protocol has been developed with volunteers in mind, and we know that volunteers have various time commitments that they are able to spend out in the field collecting observations. So we have two different levels of survey that you can complete. The level 1 survey is a really simple protocol that collects the location of the vernal pool and also just some basic characteristics. So if you don't feel confident identifying egg masses, or perhaps you only just have a handful of minutes to spend collecting data, you could complete a level 1 survey, and the data you provide us will be very valuable. So we would greatly appreciate that level of participation. And then our level 2 survey is a little bit more in depth, and it collects more detailed observations. And that's where we dive into identifying the egg masses that are present within the vernal pool. So both our level 1 and level 2 surveys are on the same data sheet. So if you're completing a level 1 survey, you only need to worry about completing about the top half of the data sheet. And you can see on the left-hand side, the level 1 survey is indicated with the light blue. So if you're just doing level 1, you only need to complete that portion. But if you are doing a level 2 survey, you do need to complete the entire data sheet. So that includes level 1 survey and also the dark blue bottom half, level 2. You may be wondering, well, when do we go out and collect data? This also depends on what level of survey you are conducting. But regardless of if you're doing a level 1 and level 2 survey, we do have specific dates for you to go out and collect data, and this coincides with the amphibian breeding season that we've been hearing a lot about. So for the lower elevations of West Virginia, the monitoring period for vernal pools is March 1st through April 15th. And for the higher elevations in West Virginia, it is March 15th through April 30th. And if you're doing a level 1 survey, you only need to worry about visiting the vernal pool one time during this amphibian breeding season. If you are doing a level 2 survey, we do recommend visiting your vernal pool at least twice during the breeding season and making sure that those 2 visits are at least 1 week apart. So that way we can monitor the amphibian development, and also, as Kevin mentioned, these species that are using the vernal pool, they're all using the vernal pool at different times. So it's really important if you are able to conduct at least 2 visits to your vernal pool for those level 2 surveys, so we can make sure we're capturing all the different species that are using these vernal pools. Now, regardless of whether you're doing a level 1 or level 2, for both surveys, we do ask that you go back to the vernal pool during the dry season, during the summer or the fall, to conduct another monitoring session. And for this dry season visit, you'll use the same exact data sheet. And we're really interested in these dry season visits because in the picture here, you can see how different a vernal pool can look in the spring versus in the fall. And as we've mentioned, a key characteristic of vernal pools is that they do dry out every year or every few years. So by going back and visiting your pool in the fall, we are able to confirm and say, yes, that is in fact a vernal pool. Or perhaps you'll learn that, oh, wow, this is actually a pond and it's not so much drying up. So it wouldn't necessarily be a vernal pool. So on your data sheet, if you would like to look at that, at the very top, there is a place to record what level of survey you are conducting and the visit number. So you can indicate if you're doing a level 1 or level 2 survey, and please indicate if you're doing if this is your first visit, your second visit, or your third visit. This is very important information to keep track of. And it's always a good practice to fill that upper portion of the data sheet out first. So today, if we were at an in-person workshop, we would actually get out into the field and visit a vernal pool. But since we are virtual, we are bringing the vernal pool to you. So we will be using this vernal pool as our example as we walk through the data sheet. And this vernal pool is one that I stumbled upon while running on the rail trail near Fairmont. So the vernal pool you see here is located about a mile or so north of Prickett's Fort State Park. It is located near a small residential community known as Catawba. And in the background behind the vernal pool, you can see the elevated rail trail corridor. And then a little bit beyond that, you can see a house. And then even further, you can't necessarily see in the picture, but it's actually the Monongahela River right there. So if we were going to be completing our data sheet for this Catawba Rail Trail, we would first indicate that today we're going to be walking through a level 2 protocol. And this is our first visit this season. So we'll indicate visit number 1. We will write our vernal pool name. And this is a descriptive name that you can come up with to name your vernal pool. It's always a good practice to name the vernal pool based on a nearby land feature or maybe a nearby stream or any other landmark that will help identify the vernal pool. So I chose to name this vernal pool Catawba Rail Trail for the name of the community that it is next to, and also indicate that it's right off the rail trail. The next line is the vernal pool code, and this can be a bit tricky to figure out, so I will explain it. But if it is way too confusing, you can leave this blank and we can figure it out once you submit your data. But the vernal pool code is a unique identifier for each vernal pool that allows our database to be organized. So that way each vernal pool has its own vernal pool code and unique identifier in the database. And the vernal pool code is basically a summary of what watershed, what ecoregion, and also the local name of where the vernal pool is. So if you see the mini equation, the first line in yellow for our example vernal pool, we know that our vernal pool is located in Fairmont on the north side of Fairmont. So it's actually located in the Monongahela watershed. And it is located in the Western Allegheny Plateau ecoregion. And then we have our unique name for the vernal pool, which is Catawba Rail Trail. So that first yellow text line is basically the full vernal pool code. And there is a VP at the beginning of our vernal pool code, which just stands for vernal pool. But because that vernal pool code is long and lengthy, we like to take an abbreviation of the vernal pool code. So it would become VP-MN for Monongahela, WP for Western Allegheny Plateau, -CRT for Catawba Rail Trail. And again, this is kind of a hard process to get straight, so you are able to just leave that vernal pool code blank if you need. And I'll also mention that you can figure out what watershed you're in and what ecoregion you're in. There are maps and links within the monitoring instruction manual. So back to our data sheet, we've got our vernal pool name, we've got our vernal pool code, we've marked our level number and our visit number. Next, we will fill out our watershed, ecoregion, and county. So we've already mentioned our watershed is Monongahela and our ecoregion is Western Allegheny Plateau. And I will explain that ecoregion is an area that has similar environmental conditions, such as climate and geology and soil and some other environmental parameters that help determine the plant and animal communities. And West Virginia has 5 different ecoregions. So again, within our monitoring manual, you can find the map that can help you locate what ecoregion you're in, and then make sure to mark down what county you are in. Next, we will record the lat long of our vernal pool. And my favorite way to get these coordinates is by using my phone and going to Google Maps, and I can drop a pin of my location. And then if you just scroll down a little bit, the pin will actually have GPS coordinates that you can then mark on your data sheet. You could also, find the location on Google Earth or Google Maps once you return home and indicate that on your data sheet. We also want to mark out what organization we are with. So let's say that I'm just a regular person and I'm not affiliated with any group. I would write down that I'm just a citizen scientist. Or if you are affiliated with a watershed group or a master naturalist program, you could indicate that there. Also, you want to put down the names of the people completing the survey. So today, my good friend Mary is helping me complete the survey, so I would write down both of our names. You want to record the date of the survey, the time, and also the current air temperature. And I'm going to use my weather app on my phone to figure this out if I have phone service, and if I don't, I will look at the weather app once I return back into cellular service. Next, we want to move on to the sky and wind code. And this chart, breaks down different conditions that are going on in the sky or with the wind. And we want to record this on our data sheet because we know that different conditions can make it easier or harder to conduct vernal pool sampling. And as we've mentioned, it is highly recommended to wear those polarized glasses, especially in the sunny conditions, to improve visibility. Our sky code classifies, what's going on up above from a 0 to 8 scale, ranging from being clear to cloudy to showers to even heavy rain and snow. And it's really important to note that you should not be conducting surveys if the sky code is 6 or above. So that would be in situations of heavy rain, sleet, or snow. Similarly, the wind code also groups or classifies the wind on a 0 to 7 scale, ranging from being really calm to gentle breezes, all the way to strong winds. And similarly, we do not want to be conducting surveys if the wind codes are 6 or above. So going back to our data sheet, we want to mark down our sky and our wind code. And I'm being extremely optimistic, and I wish we were in a place with completely sunny skies and gentle breeze. So then our sky code would be 0 and our wind code would be 1 with just very little air movements. So moving on to some characteristics related to the pool. First up is pool size. So we do ask that you estimate the pool size during your 2 visits during the amphibian breeding season. And then if you are able to return to the vernal pool in the fall, when the pool water is lower during the dry season, then you might be able to actually use a tape reel or GPS unit to actually measure the size of the pool. But to complete the data sheet, first, you want to use these references to estimate the size of the pool. So do you think your pool is the size of a large golf umbrella or a parking space or a 3-car garage, all the way up to a baseball infield or a Walmart, which is our largest size? And it's important to select a reference that, is most relatable to your vernal pool. So maybe your size is, not quite a 3-car garage, but it's definitely bigger than a parking space. You could indicate that it is a 3-car garage. So you just want to do your best guess using these given references. The next line is you will want to actually estimate the size of your vernal pool, the width and the length, and also be sure to circle meters or feet if you are collecting your estimated measurements in meters or feet. If you are using a GPS unit to measure, the third line there is where you could write down what unit you are using, such as like a Garmin GPS unit. But if you are just estimating the pool size, you could leave that blank. So going back to our example rail trail, the Catawba Rail Trail, what do you think? What would you estimate the pool size to be? I know it can kind of be hard to tell because it's just a picture. But I would estimate that the pool size be about the size of a parking space. It's definitely bigger than a golf umbrella, but it's also not quite a 3-car garage. And I'd estimate the width to be about 10 meters and the length to be about 6 meters. And again, I'm circling meters on the right-hand side to indicate that my measurement was estimated in meters and not feet. Next up is the pool type. So this can be tricky if you're not exactly sure, but you can kind of look around the landscape and the surrounding vegetation and just look around the vernal pool to try to figure out what you think is going on here. So is your pool type naturally occurring, or is it constructed? Perhaps you found this vernal pool in the botanical gardens where they've been building wetlands, or maybe you found a vernal pool in somebody's yard and they purposefully constructed a vernal pool. Or we do have a specific category for those vernal pools that are found in log, gas, or tire ruts. And if your vernal pool doesn't fit into any of those three categories, you can also write in what type of pool you have under other, or you can also circle unknown. So for our example wetland here, we know that the rail trail is in the background right up against the vernal pool. And the rail trail, is a converted railroad corridor. So we assume that the landscape has probably been altered to some extent. And we can see that the corridor for the rail trail is definitely built up. So we would probably assume that this isn't a naturally occurring wetland. But we also might not think that it's a constructed wetland because it's kind of hard to see, but this is most definitely in a forested area that kind of looks like it doesn't get a whole lot of visitors. So we don't really know if it is constructed or not. And we can definitely tell that this is not a tire rut vernal pool. So if I were completing the data sheet, I would probably mark that this is just some sort of like trailside ditch or trailside depression. The next line on the database for a level 1 survey is related to egg masses. And because right now we're just at the level 1 survey, you don't actually have to identify what species the egg masses are. We are first interested if there are egg masses. So are they present? Yes or no? And second, how abundant are they? We have 3 different categories, or 4 different categories. No, just 3, ranging from few to some to abundant. The picture on the left-hand side, I would classify that as few because you can see that there's, just a couple of egg masses at the side of the pool. And then the picture on the right looks like it has an abundant number of egg masses because there's definitely more than 10 there. And it's also really important to make sure that you're taking at least 2 pictures of the types of egg masses that are being observed. So for our example vernal pool here, we have the picture we've been looking at on the left-hand side, and then that pink oval is zoomed in, and that's the image that you see on the right-hand side. So we can see that our vernal pool does in fact have egg masses. And now we need to figure out how abundant they are. It's definitely more than a few, and I'm not quite sure if it's all the way abundant or not. So I would probably indicate this as some for our abundance for our egg masses. And again, I'd be making sure that I'm taking at least 2 pictures of those egg masses. Next up for our level 1 survey is we want to look at the water levels. As we've mentioned, the water level of these vernal pools is fluctuating throughout the year. So we really want to be looking around the edge of the vernal pool, looking at the landscape and the vegetation and the substrate for indicators as to how full or dry the pool could be. So first, we are interested in, is there water? Yes or no? And second, we want an estimate of how full the pool is. Is it nearly full or full, just like the picture on the left-hand side? Is it only partially full, like the picture in the middle? Or is it completely dry, like the picture on the right? And one indicator, or a couple of indicators for estimating this, is looking around the edge of the pool. If you can see the partially dry pool image in the center, you can see that around the edge of the pool, it's blackened, and there's that, dark leaf litter. and that's indicating that the water has actually been receding. So that can help you decide and estimate, the water levels of the pool itself. For our example vernal pool here, what do you think? How full do you think this vernal pool is? We do know that, yes, there is most definitely water in there. We can see it. But looking around the edge of the pool, I see maybe a little bit of that blackened leaf litter. But also zooming out, you can see that this vernal pool is in quite a fairly large depressional area. But I think I would indicate that this pool is full or nearly full because there is none of that blackened leaf litter around the edges. Moving on, ice cover. So first we want to know is there ice on the vernal pool? And second, how much ice is covering the vernal pool? During the early breeding season, you might encounter ice. So it's important to record that on our data sheet. And when you're estimating the coverage of the ice, we do have some categories ranging from greater than 75% to 25 to 75% to less than 25% and all the way down to none. So our example vernal pool, there is no ice covering the water. So we would indicate that no, there's no ice and our coverage is none. Moving on to our tree canopy coverage. Again, first, we're interested in, is there tree canopy coverage? And then second, we want to know just about an estimate of how much cover is actually there. In the two images on the screen, you can see on the left that that pool has greater than 75% of coverage. Whereas the pool on the left hand, or the pond really, it looks like on the left hand side, looks like it has very little to none coverage. A way that you can estimate the tree canopy coverage is by walking around the edge of the pool and looking up at all four corners to help you estimate that tree canopy coverage. And it's also really important that when we're going out and sampling, there might not be any leaves on the tree, or there might not be any leaves on the tree for your first visit, but your second visit, there might be leaves. So it's really important that we do not try to envision what coverage would be like if the leaves were out. We are really interested in documenting the conditions for that very specific day. So just record what you are seeing right there. So for our example vernal pool, we've got our typical picture we've been looking at on the left, and then just a slightly different perspective on the right. And you can see that there is a good bit of vegetation around the pool. There's also some trees growing in the water. And looking at the pool water itself, it's actually quite shaded. So I would assume that, these trees are providing canopy coverage. So we would indicate, yes, there is tree canopy coverage. And I would estimate this to be about, 25 to 75%, mostly because there's generally no leaves on the trees right now in these pictures. If these trees had leaves, I would definitely think that this would be a greater than 75% coverage. But again, we really want to record the observations that we are seeing in real time. Next, we want to make sure that we are collecting pictures. So it's always good practice to get a site overview image and then making sure to get those two pictures of the egg masses that you are seeing if they are present. If you do use iNaturalist, we do have a project on there that you can upload your images to, but that's not required in any way, just for those folks that like to use iNaturalist. So we're putting this all together. Everything we have walked through today completes our level 1 survey and our pictures that we have taken. So it's always a good time to check, make sure that we have all the lines completed of our data sheet. And we will go ahead and move on to our level 2 survey, which if you didn't have time and you could only do the level 1 survey, that is more than okay, and you could stop here. But if you have some extra time and you feel confident in your skills, we'll go ahead and move on to explaining the level 2 survey. So the first characteristics that we want to look at is if there is woody debris in the pool. And first, again, we want to know, is there woody debris present? And is it abundant, or is it some, about up to 50% or less than 50% of the pool? Or is there perhaps no woody debris present, like in the image on the right-hand side? That looks like it could be a tire rut where there is no woody debris present. And you can compare that to the picture on the left-hand side where there's a lot of woody debris there. And the picture in the middle, you know, it's kind of hard to see because the pool is rather full and we don't always know what's going on underneath the water level, but we can see that there are some woody debris sticking out. There's some standing dead trees and some branches that are at the edge of the pool. So secondly, we want to record what size of woody debris that we are seeing. Coarse woody debris is our larger woody debris. So this is anything that has a diameter of greater than 3 inches and includes, standing dead trees. This contrasts to our fine woody debris, which is our smaller, which has a smaller diameter than 3 inches. So things like dead branches or twigs. So going to our example wetland, back to the Catawba Rail Trail. What do you think? Would you classify this pool as having abundant, some, or none woody debris? And do you see coarse or fine woody debris? Let's see, I'm thinking that this vernal pool has probably some woody debris coverage. It's really hard to see because the water is kind of not super clear and it's also full, so we don't exactly know what's going on below the surface, but I'd say it has at least some woody debris. And the size of the woody debris that I'm seeing in the bottom left corner, you know, that looks like perhaps a piece of the old railroad, and that looks like a beefy piece of woody debris there. But some of the other woody debris I'm seeing is is definitely less than 3 inches. So I would probably circle that this vernal pool has both coarse and fine woody debris. Moving on, we want to record what live vegetation is found in the pool. Are you seeing floating or submerged vegetation that is growing beneath the water surface? Do you see emergent vegetation that is growing out of the water and has leaves above the surfaces? Are you seeing shrubs or trees? And the general difference between a shrub or a tree is that a shrub often has multiple woody stems, and that when it is mature, it is not taller than 6 meters. Whereas a tree typically has a single trunk, and when mature, it is more than 6 meters tall. So you can circle, more than one type of vegetation if it is present. And if there is no pool vegetation present, you can also circle none. So for our example wetland here, we can look around and figure out what type of vegetation is live in the pool. See, I'm seeing some sort of floating or submerged vegetation that is definitely growing below the water surface. And I'm seeing that there are trees also growing in the pool. So I would indicate those on the data sheet. Moving on is we're really interested in that forest buffer because we know how important the buffer is. It is important to note that when you are completing your survey, we are using a 10-meter or 33-foot buffer size. And the reason why we're using this buffer size is because it's about how far you can see when you're going out into the field to collect your surveys. And you want to record, what percent of that forest buffer is intact. Is it 75% or greater? Is it 25 to 75%? Is it less than 25%, or is it none? You also want to record the dominant forest type. Do you have broadleaf trees, which are those that shed their leaves in the winter? Or do you have conifer trees, and those are the trees that hold on to their leaves throughout the winter? Or do you have both present? Like in the picture on the screen, I'm seeing both broadleaf and conifer trees, so I would indicate both on the data sheet. And there's also a line here where you can write down notes related to your buffer. So you can put comments related to the disturbances that you're seeing, or perhaps you're seeing a bunch of invasive species that you can note, or any other tools that you are using to estimate the buffer. For our example wetland here, the way you're looking out into the picture, we know the rail trail is there. We know that we have a lawn from a residence a little bit beyond that. But behind the photographer here, it's actually pretty forested for a long time. So I'd say that this has about, definitely on the higher end of 25 to 75% coverage, but because that rail trail corridor is completely void of vegetation and it is pretty wide, that's why I would select that category for percent intact. And I'm also only seeing broadleaf trees and no conifers. And in the forest buffer notes, I would write down that there is a rail trail corridor and a residential lawn within the buffer. Next, we want to look at the water clarity, and we want to make sure we are using our polarized glasses to help reduce the glare. We have 3 different categories for water clarity. Clear means that you can easily see the bottom of the pool. Slightly turbid means that there is a little bit of murkiness or sediment within the water column, but you can still kind of see the bottom. And then our last category is turbid or opaque. And this is when you cannot see the bottom of the pool due to murky, muddy, or discolored water. And it is important to note that if there's algae present, our next line on our data sheet deals with that observation. So if there is algae present, algae is the lower weed form that doesn't have a distinguishable stem or leaf. So you can clearly see the difference between the 2 pictures here of being clear and having no algae compared to the image on the right, which has an abundance of algae. So we would want to know what percent coverage that algae is providing or occurring in the pool. We're also really interested in the substrate of the pool itself. So if you can see through the water and you can see the bottom of the pool, what is the composition of that substrate? Is it broadleaf? Does it have those maple leaves or sycamore leaves? Or is it conifer leaf? Are those present for the substrate? Or is it just sediment bottom? Perhaps there's no leaves at all. Or perhaps there's other types of substrate present. And there's also a category for unknown. If you aren't sure, perhaps the water isn't clear enough to document the substrate. So for our example vernal pool, we'll kind of walk through these characteristics. For water quality, I'm definitely going to be marking turbid because you can see that right there in the middle of the pool, it's very cloudy and we cannot see the bottom. I'm also seeing algae along, the bottom right or bottom left center of that pool. So it's not totally extensive, but I would say that it probably, at least covers greater than 25% of the pool. So I would mark the middle category. In the substrate, around the edges of the pool, I can see straight through the water column, and I can see that it is primarily broadleaf substrate on the bottom. You can also use the surrounding forest buffer to estimate whether the substrate would be broadleaf or conifer leaf. Next, we'll dive into amphibian egg mass identification. So first, there's a line for each different species that you may find out in your vernal pool. And you can indicate if you are seeing adults of that species, or perhaps you're seeing tadpoles. And you can also check the box if you are seeing egg masses. And for egg masses, it's really important to count the number of egg masses to the best of your ability. We do know that for larger vernal pools, it may be impossible to accurately count the number of egg masses. You might not be able to see the center of the pool clearly, or perhaps there's some obstruction around the center or around the edge of the pool that limits your ability to walk around the edge. So you can write down the percent of pool that you surveyed. So this could say you were able to survey about 100% of the pool. Or if there was some obstruction, you could say you were only able to survey about 50% of the pool. We're also interested in if there are any stranded egg masses. So these are egg masses that are outside the water of the pool, or that are likely to be stranded before the tadpoles emerge. So if it's right on the edge and half of the egg mass is in the water and the other half is out, you could say that that was a stranded egg mass. And again, we want to emphasize that it is really hard to sometimes identify the adults and the tadpoles from the edge of the pool. And we would rather you leave, those species unidentified than to have you enter into the pool. So just do the best that you can from the edge of the pool and never enter the water. Going back to our example here, we do see some egg masses. They look like wood frog eggs. Again, they're kind of those grape-like clusters where each embryo has its own cluster of gel. And, I'm counting about 8 egg masses here. I'm not seeing any stranded egg masses. And because the pool doesn't have any obstructions, I was able to walk around all the way around the edge and survey 100% of the pool. Next, we want to record if we are seeing any other biota. So are you seeing fish or green or bullfrogs in your pool? And if you are, that might not exactly be a vernal pool, but you can go ahead and complete your data sheet. It's okay. You also want to record if you're seeing any other aquatic biota, so anything else that is moving around in the vernal pool, such as fairy shrimp or any other macroinvertebrates. And if you are curious in invertebrates of vernal pools, I highly recommend you checking out this resource here through the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program. They have a bunch of pictures and information related to the macroinvertebrates. You can also record if you're seeing other terrestrial biota, such as the rusty blackbird, or perhaps you're seeing a orange eastern newt, and then you could submit that observation to the DNR's Citizen Science Program. So for our example vernal pool, we're not really seeing fish, we're not seeing any bullfrogs, we didn't see any other aquatic biota. Again, the water's kind of murky. We can't see it too well, so we don't see anything else utilizing the vernal pool, so we would just leave the rest of the data sheet blank. And the last part of the database is perhaps the data sheet is perhaps the most important, and that's the place for you to record comments. So this is an opportunity to put any other observations that you are seeing out in the field and record that on the data sheet. So working back through our data sheet, we want to make sure that all the lines are complete to the best of our abilities and that we are submitting sound and clear data to our program. And before we leave the site, again, is your data sheet complete? We want to make sure that we took at least 2 pictures. We want to make sure you have a plan for submitting your data to Survey 123. Are you going to do this in the field, or are you going to wait till you get home? You want to double check to make sure if you left any gear behind. You also want to have a plan to decontaminate your gear and head home. And most importantly, plan your next visit. So even though we are using this scientific protocol, using a data sheet, the data we collect is an opportunity for us to learn about our vernal pool. And as we go back and visit it time and time again, we can really kind of develop a relationship and get to know what's happening with our vernal pool. So I'm really excited to come back to this vernal pool because I'm curious, like, is this water murky because we just had some rainfall, or is it always murky? I'm also really curious about this algae. What could be causing it? Is the algae always there, or is it there just for some reason today? So as you go back to your vernal pool, you can kind of get to know your vernal pool. To submit data, we are asking everybody to use Survey 123. So to use Survey 123, you do need to go to your app store on your device and download an app. You can see the icon of the Survey 123 on the right-hand side. It's that green notebook icon with a check mark. So first, download the app onto your device, and then you can scan the QR code on the left-hand side of the screen here, and that will open the Survey 123 form, and you can indicate that you would like to open it within your app. And you will be prompted throughout this whole process to create an ArcGIS account, but you don't have to. There's always an option towards the bottom of the login screen to hit continue without logging in. So it's important to note you don't have to have a login to Survey 123. You can use it without a login. As you are entering your data into Survey 123, let's see, I'm going to switch over and share my screen. So on the desktop version here, we are seeing our Survey 123 form. It's important to note that the very first question will populate the following fields of the survey. So if you are doing a location only data entry, your form will be really short to complete. If you're doing a level 1 only, your form will be a little longer, but not quite as long as a level 2 survey. So you would want to make sure and put in your name and your email, your phone number. And this form is set up to be exactly like the data sheet. And one important thing I would like to highlight here is when you're entering in your vernal pool location, if you are doing this at your house and you have your location services enabled on your device, it will automatically populate with where you are at the time you're using the survey. So if you're waiting until you get back home to submit your location, make sure that you are typing in the correct GPS coordinates of your vernal pool, or you can also toggle on the map. It's not exactly working today, right now, but you can toggle around and move the map and drop the pin for where your vernal pool is actually located. Directly into the Survey 123 form, you can add images of your vernal pool. Again, you just want to enter your data just exactly as we have when we went through the data sheet. Let me switch back over to my PowerPoint. And the second QR code that we have on the screen towards the bottom here, we have a data entry tutorial where it will actually walk you through a little bit more in depth as to how to use the Survey 123. We also have a Survey 123 guide on our vernal pool homepage that you can check out that can help you troubleshoot how to get access to the survey and a few tips and tricks for submitting your data. One important thing to note is that when you are conducting your dry season visit in the summer or the fall, you're doing the exact same survey that you did in the spring with just a few changes. So you are probably more likely to be able to collect more accurate measurements of the pool size. We do recommend you could take a tape measure with you on your dry season visit to get a more accurate estimate. Since the water level will also be lower, you are more likely to be able to examine the substrate of the pool to evaluate that leaf litter composition. And when you go to estimate the tree canopy coverage, we recommend walking around the edge of the pool and estimating the coverage from all four corners. And in the dry season, you might be able to walk to the center of the pool and get your estimate of coverage there too. Yay. Okay, that's the protocol. I hope you are feeling confident that you can collect those observations. And so the next step is getting out and exploring and finding your own local vernal pool that you can monitor and contribute data to this project. Some tips and tricks for finding a vernal pool is my favorite, the springtime, is to let your ears guide you. As Kevin mentioned, many of these frogs and spring peepers are very loud. They're vocal, they're busy in the vernal pool. So you can, if you hear them, you could perhaps follow your ears and look to see if they are in a vernal pool. During the summertime, you can also find vernal pools. They will be, depressions within the landscape, and they will be void of vegetation. So it's hard to imagine right now, but when summertime comes, the forest really turns into a jungle. So if you're seeing a depression that doesn't have any vegetation in it, you can think that's kind of unusual. I wonder if it's void of vegetation because it holds on to water most of the year. So then plants can't necessarily grow there. So that's another indicator. The QR code here will take you to a hillshade GIS layer online. And a hillshade layer is basically, looking at the terrain of the landscape if you removed all the vegetation. So it can help you find small depressions that you could then go out and check in the field to see if it is a vernal pool. So one last thing is if you guys could please complete the post-workshop evaluation survey. We've got a QR code here, and I'll also include the survey in our follow-up email. And if you have any questions at all, you can reach out to saveourstreams@westvirginia.com. And we'll go ahead and take any questions right now.
Awesome. Thanks, Jess. Looks like we did have one question in the chat. Emma said, we have this forested swamp at Jackson's Mill, and I suspect it might also be a vernal pool. I have seen amphibian eggs in it, as well as macroinvertebrates, and have seen it dry into a mud pit during the drought 2 years ago. What is the best way to confirm or deny my suspicions?
I love this. I like that you're getting curious about the landscape. And so one way that you could learn more about your vernal pool is, by visiting it throughout the different seasons and also throughout different years. And if your vernal pool does in fact, or your suspected vernal pool does in fact dry up at least every few years, then it sounds like it definitely could be a vernal pool.
Great. Another question. Andrea asked, do you want us to report macroinvertebrates?
Yes, you can definitely record what macroinvertebrates you are seeing. At the bottom of the data sheet, there are some basic macroinvertebrate categories like fairy shrimp or caddisfly or dragonfly, and you could circle those categories to record those observations.
Awesome. Nabil asked, do gas well spillways count as vernal pools?
If they are functioning as vernal pools, meaning that they are providing habitat to the amphibians or providing habitat to macroinvertebrates, then yes, we are very much interested in those habitats that are more opportunistic than perhaps natural on the landscape. But submitting those observations will help us understand vernal pools and which type of habitats are present in West Virginia.
Awesome. Let's see here. Sarah asked, do you have projects on the iNaturalist app?
Yes, there is a West Virginia vernal pool project that you can join. And I'll be sure to include that link in the follow-up email.
Wonderful. I think that's all that we had in the chat. So that's great.
All right. Thank you all so much for attending today and being an engaging audience. We appreciate your attendance, and also we really hope that this workshop will inspire you to get out and to collect data. Just doing the best that you can, and together we all can make a difference and help us understand and raise awareness of vernal pools in West Virginia. So please stay in touch, and we really look forward to engaging with you and seeing your data roll in. Thank you.